Welcome to Charts Today, Asia Pacific. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 23rd of October, comes to you from London. And we start with the dollar index pushing higher again yesterday, nudging multi-week highs, really levels we haven't seen since August, now just been tested. And of course, if we take out this high that we did see in August, that would be very bullish for the dollar. So, dollar strength a factor here. We've got an upside target some 2% higher at 98.09 on the dollar index. And this upside target here of 113, some 17% higher if we can break this trend and move higher than the August high. So very significant. Looking at the euro, we see the euro weaker on that stronger dollar. And again, that August low could come under pressure. We have got a downside target not yet activated on the 60-minute chart to 112, 2% lower. Against the yen, the dollar actually weakening slightly this morning, stronger yen as we're seeing some markets in Asia selling off. That's driving some investment to the safer haven of the yen. So still bullish on all three time frames, but just a little bit weaker dollar yen. Looking at sterling, sterling yesterday fell through the 130 level. Brexit concerns still weighing heavily. We're bearish on all three time frames with a lagging line below. Remembering this is my weekly, long term, my daily, medium term, and my 60-minute short term charts. And we do have downside targets here. 126, 128. And if we move below this 126 level, we activate a downside target to parity on sterling, which is hard to imagine, but that's what the target says if we move to new lows. Looking at sterling against the euro, we're seeing here that actually a little bit stronger this morning, but again bearish on that medium and long term, on the long term and short term charts. Medium term sterling did break through on the euro, but short term we do have pressure there. Against the Swiss franc, sterling is bearish as well. And against the Australian dollar, we're also seeing short-term bearishness creeping in. Bitcoin, little changed. Again, been stuck in a rut for over a week now, and really over a few months. We've just not seen Bitcoin doing anything, but it's mostly bearish. The US market opened higher yesterday, but that quickly evaporated for the S&P 500 to finish lower, so sentiment isn't great. Looking at the Nasdaq 100, this actually bucked the trend a little bit and was up yesterday. The Dow down 0.5%, and the Russell 2000 was pretty badly hit, down over 1%. So we're seeing small caps in the US really hit. The futures this morning indicating markets will go lower. The S&P down over 1%, the Nasdaq down 1.25%. So it really does suggest markets down. FTSE futures down 0.75%, and the DAX is down just under 0.25%. Looking at the FTSE 100, the cash market bearish on all three time frames now. The DAX, the FTSE mid caps also just scraping the bottom here, so that's looking pretty bearish, turning bearish on that long term chart. And then the DAX also looking lower at 0.25% down yesterday. The CAC Courant also lower. All markets in Europe just looking quite worrying. Japan down over 2.5%. Really now starting to look a bit worrying on this long-term chart. We've got further downside on the short-term chart. Downside targets medium-term activated 13 to 16% lower. Equities really going through the mill. And the Hang Seng also bearish below the cloud. And China unwinding its 4% rise yesterday, down 1.7% at the moment. The Indian market down 0.5%, and the Aussie market down over 1%. Brent crude is off about just under 0.5%. Still bearish on the short term. Saudis making comments that they'll behave in the oil market. That is actually just pushing oil lower. Fears of price rises receding, and WTI also lower. So we are seeing some movement there. US nat gas sitting at $3.15. Gold holding on to its gains. The strong dollar weighing a bit on gold, but interestingly, not really giving up the gains that we saw last week, and really in the last month, primarily because we are just seeing that some money driving towards that with fear, and if we move higher, we activate another upside target. Silver sitting similar to gold, not looking as bullish on the medium-term chart, and US 10-year yields just sinking lower to 3.17%, and that's just taking them short-term bearish. Bonds in Europe down this morning. We're seeing the German bond actually looking bullish short-term, but just pulling down this morning. Taking a look at what happened overnight. Well, we see here that data on the previous screen coming from Thomson Reuters Icon or Metastock. If you're a private investor, this data here on this screen is my Asian screen, all coming from Yahoo Finance. So we see here that we saw the movement in the indices yesterday. The Nasdaq really bucking the trend. Europe was down, and we're seeing Asia this morning with some pretty big falls. China now down 1.8%. This data all coming in live off the Google feed, so off the Yahoo Finance feed, so pretty useful. We're seeing some pretty big falls here. Kospi down in Korea down 2.85%, Taiwan down 2%, Jakarta down 0.4%. So we are seeing New Zealand down 1.5%. So we are seeing pretty big falls across Asia. Taking a look at the Nasdaq itself, the performances yesterday, we saw Google actually up 0.4%, Amazon was up 1.43%, and Apple was up 0.6%. So the majors still holding on, but of course we are seeing those futures a lot lower today. Facebook clinging on into the 150s, but we do have downside targets for Facebook now, 142, 105 and 108. That's some 30% lower for Facebook, so pretty scary targets there. We did see Tesla actually holding on yesterday, 0.36% up, but that 250 level is very critical still for Tesla. Netflix were down just under 1%, and Microsoft did actually just nudge that $110, which has just struggled with. We see here on the relative chart to the Dow over the last few months, Microsoft has really struggled to outperform the market. Taking a look at the markets this morning, Aussie market has got quite a lot of gainers. We can just tell very quickly the state of the markets just for those gainers. We're seeing Heathcote here jumping some 19%. Bellamy's up 4%, but a lot of these stocks still bearish below the cloud and entering long-term bearish territory. We've underperformed the Dow, for example, by 20%, having outperformed earlier in the year by 25%. Looking at the downside, just clicking on the top column here, we see here we've got Resolute Mining down 11%. Quite a lot of big fallers here. 7 West Media down 7%. So we are seeing quite big falls there. So it's whilst the Aussie market is looking better than most, it's still with a lot of gainers. Still does have some pretty big falls. Here we see the Indian market. This is the Nifty 50, just ranking at the top. We see India bulls. They've had a terrible time in recent months. We've seen the big falls here on the weekly chart, and the underperformance some 40% worse than the Dow. But we're seeing recovery, some respite of recoveries coming in, and housing is the area that we're seeing that. If we look at housing development finance, we're seeing much the same picture. Not as bad on that weekly chart, but still lower. Coal India also lower. So we are seeing that Tata Motors in the gainers. So there are some gainers. We're seeing some quite big moves to the upside there. Looking at the downside, Asian Paints down 6%, Wipro down 4.25%. These are all the real-time updates coming in from Yahoo. So we're seeing here quite big moves there. China, a few gainers are in securities, but only a few gainers. Nearly all stocks in China are selling off, and we're seeing just a sea of red on the Shanghai top 50 stocks. So that's really showing through. Here we see here Wahoo Chemical down 9%. A lot of stocks, 7%, 6%, 5%. A lot of stocks falling lower, and the picture not looking pretty there in China. Hong Kong, similarly, only two rises. Shenzhou International is up, but bearish medium term. And if we look at the bearish stocks, we see here again big falls, 7.5%, 6%. Taking a look at the Nikkei, we see we do have a handful of gainers here. If we look at the gainers first of all, we've got NEC, Nikon, quite a few gainers there. But overall, of course, it's still a sea of red on the Chinese market. Kawasaki Heavy Industries down 10%, for example. A lot of bearish looking charts here, and that's playing out in the markets. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.